Okay, Council, you are now going live right now.
Thank you very much. Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the City of Beaumont Special Council meeting of Thursday, November 26th at 11 a.m. As always, we are pleased to be here today on the traditional territory of Treaty 6. We acknowledge all those who share a deep connection with this land. The City of Beaumont respects the histories, languages, and cultures of all of Canada's First Peoples, whether they be of First Nation, Métis, or Inuit descent, and appreciates that their presence continues to enrich Canada's vibrant communities. We are all treaty people. And so up on the agenda today, we are here to deal with the effects of the new orders that just recently came out from the Alberta government in relation to COVID-19. And so we will only be considering the two items that are on the agenda. Can I get a motion to adopt the agenda as presented? Councillor Hendricks, thank you.
Your worship, so moved.
All those in favor?
You want buttons?
Buttons, please, yes.
Thank you. I assume that, John, sorry.
Yeah, no worries. It's always good to clarify. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Yeah, that carries unanimously. There is no items in the consent agenda, which brings us to item 4A, and we might combine it with all into one big item. So I'll turn it over to the CAO and the rest of administration to lead us through what we need to do.
All right, thank you very much, Mayor Stewart. Good afternoon, members of council, members of the public who are streaming in on YouTube. Yeah, we've got the agenda here this morning it's kind of separated into three parts. One, I'm going to provide a very brief update on what we've been able to learn so far on the new measures that are being put in place. Two is we're going to present some scenarios and a recommendation around our rec facilities. And with that, we're looking for a decision from council moving forward. So we'll do that more formally. And then we'll close the meeting by talking a little more, a high level. Mike B will talk a little bit about our plans for communications. It's going to be more strategic than it is, specifically detailed. And it will also depend on the decision you make with the rec facilities. I will put a caveat on some of the things I'm going to share right now is that we're still sifting through the measures. The measures that came down this week, I've said this in emails, have been extraordinarily confusing and incomplete. And we've spent the last 2 days literally multiple calls per day with AHS and other agencies in the province trying to sort through them. A lot of the questions that have been asked in the calls that I've been on, even Dr. Hinshaw has not had the answer and has said that she would have to get back to us. So I do want to set a bit of a context, though, more so for the public than for council, because I know I've been involved in discussions with council, and council certainly understands the seriousness of where our situation is, but particularly for Beaumont. Let me cast a little bit of a scenario here or throw out the context. We have the worst cases of COVID, the worst COVID rate per 100,000 in the Edmonton region. The Edmonton region is among the worst in Alberta right now, and Alberta is the worst in Canada. Those are mind-numbing numbers. We are effectively one of the worst in Canada right now. Now, there's some anomalies with the size of our city and how the cases will impact that case per 100, but that doesn't make it any less serious. So we've got a problem here. The number one place for activity for incubation is the household. It's still the household. The number one spreader in Beaumont and Alberta in the Edmonton region is a private dwelling. People are just not getting it. 40% of the cases right now are between the age of 20 and 40 years old. The largest portion of that demographic is between the ages of 20 and 30 years old. Those are the people that are getting it and spreading it right now. We're now at a situation, I remember earlier on, where community spread was 0, a couple percentages, 5%. 80% of the transmission activity right now is within the community, 31% in a private dwelling. From the month of November, from October to November, in the month of October, childcare cases represented less than 1%. They now represent 1.5%. That's with all the measures that are in place. And when Dr. Hinshaw was providing us with this information, she went on about the childcare and how well they are equipped and the measures they've put in place. And even with those, they're now seeing that these things are rising. You can go to the next slide, please, Lauren. And I've just got one slide, and it's more general, but I did want to make a couple points. I've talked about the seriousness and how we have defied the odds. And you can see in the top right-hand corner our active rates. That active rate was actually reported as 708 2 days ago. A lot of the calls I've been on with AHS, specifically ones talking about the data, is they're struggling significantly right now on the completeness and the accuracy of the data. And that caveat was thrown out a lot. I don't say that to discount the numbers I just threw at you. I say that to just compounds the seriousness of the situation. We've heard this on the news all week about contract tracing has almost come to a standstill, about the sheer number of people who are not providing information for contact tracing, so that we are getting to the point, I believe it's at 60% unknown origin. So it's getting tougher every day, and each one of us can do our part. The calls I was on yesterday with Dr. Hinshaw, that was her message over and over again, is we've got to do our part. It's really that simple. The physical distancing and the other health measures, the wearing the mask, the not visiting, those are all things that unless we do that, this thing's going to continue to spiral. Dr. Hinshaw yesterday also regularly reminded us that the intent of the new measures is to minimize personal contact. So to reduce the number of close contacts over the next 3 weeks. All of the measures that we consider as a municipality, and I want to point you to that third bullet. I'm not going to go through these item by item. It was an alarming statement made yesterday in one of the meetings I was at, and it caught my eye. And that statement was, municipalities can determine how we offer amenities to the public, provided we abide by the public health measures. That is a really serious statement, and that puts what we do in our community in your hands, with the intent that the new measures are to minimize personal contact. So I want to really plant that seed because it's something that's really hit home for me. The notion of social gatherings, about public places, a lot of those are still yet to be determined, but the orders clearly identify that a private social gathering is any type of private or social function or gathering at which a group of persons come together and move freely around to associate, mix, or interact and with each other for social purposes, rather than remaining seated or stationary for the duration of a function or gathering. But there's two exceptions. It doesn't include a gathering which all persons are members of the same household, and a gathering which a person who resides on their own interacts with two other people. I read that out because we're about to ask you to make a serious decision regarding our rec facilities. So I just want to keep that in the back of our mind, that the intent of the new measures are to minimize personal contact. So with that, I'm going to move this into the discussion around the rec facilities. We've put together some high-level numbers, and Paul's going to walk us through some scenarios. But I want to throw it out there that Beaumont is a very unique situation. So with that, I'm going to pass it over to Paul, and I can ask any questions, unless you want to do some questions now, Mayor Stewart, or we can just move into the next portion of the meeting.
No, I think it's pretty straightforward. We'll just move into the next portion, and then we'll open it up, because I think it'll give us the grander, bigger picture.
Good morning, Your Worship and members of council. It's an unfortunate situation that we find ourselves in the rec world right now. Obviously, when we opened the Beaumont Sport and Rec Center in the fall, we did not see this being a day we were going to have this conversation. But we've been scrambling the last couple of days trying to evaluate what these new restrictions mean to us in the recreation world, because of course we're very front line, very front center with the public. And we've been operating under a restricted model since we opened the rec center. And these further restrictions, of course, are now impacting the bottom line more than ever. I'm just going to walk through some of the highlights here on the first slide here. Businesses are closed, which affect us under that restriction, is the community center that we have, as well as all levels of sport that would be using our facilities, both Ken Nickel and the rec center, BSRC. And then further down the slide, you'll see that indoor fitness, recreation, sports, and physical activity centers, dance and yoga, and on it goes, public swimming pools, they're all operating with restrictions. Facilities that can be open for individual studio time, training, or exercise only. There can be no group fitness, group classes, group training, team practices, or games. Instructors can still use facilities to broadcast virtual fitness classes from the facility, but can have no group classes. There are some exemptions that have been applied for in certain areas and are still operating. What we're seeing here today, Ken Nickel, for example, has one exempted group that's using that, some of the ice surface there, if not both, at certain times during the day. At the rec center, we have some use in the pool for lane swimming. We've got drop-in for pickleball and a couple other drop-in badminton. We do have some school use still going on in the field house and the gymnasium. Those are exempted. They're still falling under the school program. And the climbing wall was part of that as well under the school program for fitness. The ice surface is not being used right now at the BSRC. We can go to the next slide. We pulled together some very high level numbers to show the revenue loss that we're experiencing under these restrictions. And we've broken it down with the three buildings that we're mainly talking about, which is the CCBCC, Ken Nickel, and the BSRC. And to summarize it at the bottom there, you can see the revenue shortfall anticipated per month. That is not an insignificant amount of money. And if we had a crystal ball and knew where we were headed, it would be a lot easier to make these decisions, and these conversations could be more fruitful. But right now, that's what we're facing with what we've been operating under and what we're going to continue to operate in for at least the next 3 weeks. Can we move to the next slide? The only levers we have at our disposal are basically staffing levels, which of course reflects operating the facilities. We've looked at all the expenses that it included in operating our facilities. Utilities are pretty much a fixed cost. The only way utilities could recognize some savings is if there was a prolonged closure of a facility, in which case, for an example, you could turn off an ice plant, save on power, that sort of thing. But if you're in a short term, whether it be a short-term closure or still operating, you obviously cannot adjust those expenses or affect those expenses, sorry, in utilities. So those are fixed costs. The levers we have to work are really just staffing levels, and they're dependent upon the operating that we're doing, whether we're full bore, halfway, a third, a quarter, or zero. Those are the only way we can save any money to offset this revenue loss. And mainly the revenue losses are reflected in rentals, because our biggest users for our rec facilities are your minor hockeys, your dance, your skating, your skating clubs, your soccer in the field house, for example, lacrosse. So with the restrictions in place, none of those groups are allowed to use those facilities as team activities, team practices, team games. So that's your biggest loss. What's still going on is the revenue that's coming in is really restricted to just some small drop-in activities. Next slide. So this next slide shows if we were to make some maneuvers for closing something or redeploying staff, adjusting staffing levels to reflect the operating, whatever level we're at, there's potential for reducing expenses. And these numbers, again, they're a quick snapshot. We turned this around in 24 hours. They're by no means 100% accurate, because it is a snapshot. It is a best guess at this point. But as you can see, there is some definite savings. But of course, those savings are tied to the decision we're asking for council today as to what is the service level that we're going to continue to provide, knowing the restrictions and the financial impact that's tied to that decision. We look around the region. We've talked to some of our colleagues. I've been getting emails for 2 days now from different colleagues in the recreation world. And the challenge we're having mainly is the restrictions that we've been under and the ones we're going to are being interpreted in some ways differently. And I know AHS has been asked for clarification in some areas, and we're waiting for that. And it's really hard to plan and make adjustments, because what it does is it causes confusion amongst the operators of these facilities, staff, as well as the public at large. And as you can see here, Devon and Morinville, Edmonton, St. Albert, Leduc, Strathcona County, they're all operating in similar yet different ways. And I think the way we interpret it, what AHS is trying to do is you're obviously trying to reduce the transmission points, but there's some flexibility in how you interpret it, which means the municipality is left to make the decision on how they can safely operate as long as it's within that guideline. When you get into the real specific questions, they don't have an answer for us right now. So it is a best practice, what you can manage, what you can actually safely operate. And that's what we're seeing reflected in our partners, as well as further out. I've heard from Coal Lake, Edson, Lacombe, and they're all doing it yet again differently again. Some are shut down completely. Some are still open to certain activities. Some are half, they've shut down the ice rink, for example. Others are still open, using it for private cohorts, for example. So there's a variety of ways. And again, it's just a question of a service level. None of these measures are going to realize the revenue loss. There's no question about that. It's just a matter of what does council want to do for our community as far as the service level, the expectations of the public, and what we want to do for them. So next slide, please. Our recommendations at this point, number one, is to close Ken Nickel. Any exempted user, assuming they are continuing to being an exempted user, they have to apply for that under the new measure. And I don't know what the timeline is for the approval if they get it. We could relocate them to the BSRC. We would look at allowing family cohort hourly bookings of ice surface, gymnasium, and field house. How we roll that out is still to be determined, but it's definitely an option. And it is not, there's an asterisk aside that. No provincial direction on that right now. It's still kind of one of those to be interpreted, to be determined clauses. So I'm throwing that out there. It's an option. Of course, if recommendation number one is a full staffing complement, we would obviously look at redeploying potentially some staff to other areas within the city as need be, other duties. But what it does is it concentrates our operations into the one building rather than still trying to maintain two. And we can reduce the staff level at Ken Nickel and redeploy resources elsewhere. And the third piece on that recommendation number one is to postpone winter registration, which is coming up November 30th for all our programs starting January. And the rationale behind that is it's without a crystal ball. We don't know what January is going to look like, but it's fair to say at this point, it's hard to imagine that we're going to be full bore with programming in January. And pushing the registration out to January will save us a lot of work for taking all the bookings and then having to cancel and refund, as well as the financial hit, because every time you do a transaction, there's a point of sale percentage, right, on that transaction. So there's definitely a financial impact. And it will also be less confusing, we feel, for the public. We'll communicate this accordingly, of course, but it'd be less confusing to push it out rather than to take it all and then just go cancel it in a couple of weeks again. So that's recommendation number one. Recommendation number two, close Ken Nickel, close BSRC, go down to absolute minimum staffing, redeploy staff where possible. And of course, recommendation number three is if council has another one or whatever direction council wants to go. So that's the end of the slide presentation, I believe, Lauren. Oh, sorry. Excuse me, council. Pros and cons are associated with each recommendation. Recommendation number one for closing Ken Nickel, keeping BSRC operating, is providing residents an opportunity to stay active, mental health, positive impacts. There is some cost savings potentially with Ken Nickel close, as well as the aforementioned pushing the winter registration date out might save us approximately $8,000 just in point of sale refund charges. And the downside to recommendation number one is the revenue intake is still drastically reduced as we're still operating. We still have, of course, increased risk of transmission of COVID-19. we could not be in alignment with AHS direction. We say that carefully because as I said earlier, it's very open to interpretation on some of these restrictions. If the clarification does come out, it will obviously adjust as we need to at that time. It's clear that the province has downloaded some of this decision-making to the municipality, and that's why we're here today. Recommendation number 2, pro, would be some cost savings. Obviously, if you go full stop on these facilities, you're obviously going to reduce that transmission point, and you'd be fully in alignment, you could argue, with AHS intention of these restrictions. The downside, of course, is what comes with a full closure of all our facilities, and that's the impact to our community. We're not in alignment potentially with regional partners, although I mentioned earlier, some of the outliers are closing, and it's very, I don't want to say haphazard, but really that's what it feels like right now amongst the region and beyond. And it's reflected in just some of the measures that they're implementing. So again, it goes back to the municipality's decision on what they can safely operate and whatever their risk tolerance is, both financially and with the intention of AHS's restrictions. I think that's the final slide, or am I going to get one more slide for questions? There we go. Thank you, Council.
No, I appreciate the presentation, the broad overview, and the specific recommendation on our rec facilities. I got to admit where I'm sort of struggling with this is are we planning for 3 weeks or are we planning for 3 months? And so that's the question ahead of us. So, because with numbers like those, revenue losses and cost savings, for my decision over the longer term will be shorter than if it's a short-term decision. So at this point, we'll open it up to questions, and then we'll see about where we want to go with recommendations 1 and 2. Councillor Hendricks, followed by Councillor Daniluk.
I believe I'll let Mr. Daniluk in first. I think his hand was up first.
Oh, it just comes up on the screen.
I hear you.
So.
No, I'm being polite. Go ahead,
Councillor
Mr. Daniluk.
Thank you, Senator Hendricks, for that courtesy. Much appreciated. I agree with Mayor Stewart. It's a question of duration. I know, Mr. Suter, you have to give us the financial picture. That's part of your job, and I do appreciate the numbers. But for me, it comes down to simply a safety question for our citizens and what is best interest of our citizens. As you mentioned, it seems to me that the decision has been downloaded to us yet once again. So the question I have is, in the recommendations, 1 and or 2, what is the recommendation for the closure period? Is it for a 2-week period, for example, starting next Monday for 2 weeks or 3 weeks, or is it a full 30 days? What do you recommend based on the discussions AHS has with us? And Mr. Schwartz can probably answer that question probably. I know what the intention is from your meetings, but the public out there, the perception, what I got from the press conferences and news media is that it's not emphasizing personal distancing. It's not coming across that way in the messaging from the province in the public media. It's coming from you guys to us from private conversation with AHS, and that's great. So we have to make sure we do our communication piece, emphasizing if we do a closure, why we're doing it, because it's not coming across in the media, that intention you conveyed to us today. So are we looking at 2 or 3 weeks or a month? What is the recommendation duration, please? Thank you.
Yeah, very good question. I guess we should have clarified that. At this point in time, the measures that the province has put in place is 3 weeks. So our recommendation would be for the next 3 weeks and then revisit.
If I may, Mayor Stewart.
Yeah,
So,
go ahead.
Mr. Schwartz, are you recommending Mr. Suter starting, assuming Monday? I can't, if you did proceed today, I can't see us starting tomorrow. It's just too soon. Are we looking at maybe starting on Monday? Is that, or Tuesday? Is that the anticipation? Or can we start as early as Saturday if we needed to? Just from a logistical perspective, what is the expectation? What is a reasonable expectation to, if council votes to do a 1 or 2, when will we start?
I'm just going to talk about the AHS measures, and then I'm going to pull it over to Paul logistically, because I know his staff's been doing a lot of work right now. A lot of the measures went in place effective immediately, and a number more, the remaining measures go into place effective tomorrow. So from that perspective, I know Paul's group's been working on notifying groups. Certain things have stopped. So Paul, I'm going to toss that over to you from a logistics perspective. My understanding is it would be effective immediately.
Yeah, I think we could certainly close the doors immediately if that's the decision. It's just the communication piece is going to take a bit of time. Ideally, you'd like to have a little bit of time to do this, but that date is definitely open for discussion that day, whether it's tomorrow or Monday, Saturday. It's just a communication piece, really, more than anything.
Right, that's I anticipated, but thank you for clarifying. Thank you, Mayor Stewart.
Yeah, thank you. Councillor Hendricks.
Your worship, thank you. Couple comments and a question. So regarding Beaumont, as a community, we're unique, and we're unique for obviously the wrong reason with respect to this COVID package, but we're also unique with respect to our age mix, our population age mix. If you look at what I'm hearing is creating some of the issues relative to age, we have an abundance of those people in our community. And so it would be interesting if we had some stats again, just outlining where our age mix is percentage wise, because it's significant if you take where we are in that group that was discussed here earlier. Also, thank you for the revenue versus expenses discussion. My question is on cash flow and what the impact is to our community in cash flow, and whether or not you would require an interim budget just to offset this particular expense piece. We do have a debenture process that we're following with the new facility, and I'm assuming that there's some dates and timelines attached to that. So my question would be whether or not an interim budget adjustment would be required today or through the budget discussions we're going to have in the next day or so to offset what we're hearing this morning.
Thank you very much, Councillor Hendricks. I'm going to refer this to Mr. Dowler or Mr. DeBlanco. If either of the two of you are on. If you're not, then I can wing this one.
We got Mr. DeBlanco. According to the, here we go.
I can't foresee a need to go through the debenture process for this or do an interim budget for cash flow. We have other, as we saw in the Q3 report, we have other ways to fund this at our disposal. One being the operating support transfer that we have temporarily for between now and March 31st. So there is that money available to fund this. I wouldn't recommend, from a cash flow perspective, we should be all right.
Okay, thank you.
Follow up, are you good?
No, then I'm good. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hendricks. Councillor Stout, followed by Councillor Van Newkirk.
Thank you, Worship. Yeah, forgive me, this might be a bit of a rambling question. I'm trying to frame my thoughts on this. Looking at those two options, the Ken Nicol seems to be gets close. That doesn't seem to be up for debate unless council really wants to keep it open. And so the question becomes, to what extent do we close the BSRC or not? And I'm wondering, the main downside to me and the driver for this is public safety, and so the object of the exercise is to try and reduce the level of transmission that we're getting, if we are getting it at the BSRC. And Mr. Schwartz, you gave us some statistics to start with. In choosing whether or not I'm closing the BSRC, I'm wondering, do we have any statistical basis or any data at all that tells us how sport and recreation centres operated in the reduced manner that Mr. Suter described? What impact, if any, that would have on transmission? Do we have any feeling at all, or are we just really guessing? Because one of the things that occurs to me as well is that keeping limited sports facilities open may actually reduce the need that people feel for going to one another's houses to and thereby reduce the level of household transmission, perhaps, though I'm guessing that the data to support that argument would be almost impossible to find. Anyway, I'm sorry, rambling question. Is there any statistical basis or any information at all that would tell us what the benefit of closing down the BSRC altogether versus keeping it open in a limited way might be on transmission rates?
Yeah, a very good question. Thank you, Councillor Stout, through the mayor to the rest of council. I was involved in a discussion, I think it was yesterday, it might have been the day before, with AHS, and we really walked through the different transmission areas, and one of them is recreation facilities. And one of the comments that Dr. Hinshaw made was sports teams and their associations have been particularly good at putting measures in to prevent the spread. And in fact, until about a week or so ago, there wasn't much statistics showing, and the sports teams were staying relatively COVID-free. However, in the last week, there have been a number of outbreaks with sports teams. Again, not knowing who brought it into the team, they made the decision to stop team activity to reduce that personal contact. So she was really trying to be really clear that she's not identifying sports teams per se as being these transmission hotspots, but the promotion of close contact is why they included them. So I'm not explaining this very well. There is no, the data is increasing month to month among sports teams, but not at an alarming rate as it is with private dwellings. So with the intent of the new measures to minimize personal contact, that's how they get caught into that web. As far as, do we go to these reduced measures, and do we believe, is there any statistics that are going to say we're going to change the curve by this much? The answer is no.
Yeah, okay, that's what I thought you might say. Thank you, but I still need to confirm it. So we're operating a little bit in the dark here. I mean, it's really our best guess as to whether or not this will improve things. Okay, thank you. And there was no indication that, and the other issue is then there's the question of setting an example. What we actually want to do is to reduce close contact in all circumstances, because we want to encourage everybody to reduce the number of contacts. Is that correct? Is that what Dr. Hinshaw is suggesting?
Absolutely. That is the whole intent of the new measures, succinctly said.
Thank you.
Councillor Van Newkirk, followed by Councillor Barnhart.
Yeah, this is quite a struggle, isn't it? You know, the biggest numbers around in Beaumont, demographics in Beaumont being what they are. Yet I don't think we've had a confirmed case from the BSRC. So just a series of questions here for admin. Have we had a confirmed case to the BSRC? I know if we had, it would have showed up on the outbreak chart, and I don't think I saw that. Just confirmation.
We are not aware of any cases. None of them have been communicated, but as you know, Councillor Van Newkirk, we are not getting very much data. So if it occurred, we don't know.
That's right. Yeah, there's a 60% gap in all that anyways, or whatever the contract tracing gap is. Recommendation number 1 didn't speak to the CCBCC. What of the CCBCC in recommendation 1?
Through your worship to Councillor Van Newkirk, the CCBC is closed. It's a community center. It's not allowed to be open. There is Black Gold School leasee in the basement. They have no access to the building. They will continue their operations. As well, the other leasee is upstairs in the dance studio, Beaumont Dance. So they can do whatever they're allowed to do under the restrictions, but the center is closed itself.
Yeah, thank you for that clarification. And I think that's important, because the decision that we make or don't make today may show some lights on in there still too, right? So it's important to understand that those lessees are in there. Another question, some of the bigger picture ones have been asked, but Mr. Suter, what is the, of the available time to book what can be booked in the BSRC right now? Is it full? Are there gaps? Is there more demand than there is supply? Can you paint that picture for us, please?
I will try, through your worship, to Councillor Van Newkirk. There are gaps, mainly because our biggest renters are not able to use it right now. If we're going to remain open, we will adjust what we're doing with some of those spaces. For example, the drop-in opportunities in the gym, we would maybe alter that to kind of focus it on a narrower gap or narrow window, throughout the day, and then provide other opportunities for the cohort, for example, to rent some of that space. So same with the ice surface. No one's using it right now because we had shut it. And then the field house has been closed, everybody but the schools. So there could be gaps or would be gaps open up if we're going to continue operations for some use for example, private rentals. So it's not a huge revenue maker. It wouldn't be, but it would at least allow the building, if it's open anyway, we might have somebody in there. As long as we're operating it under the guidelines safely, then yes, there would be gaps available or to be filled.
Yeah, and if those gaps were filled, I guess my point is that it probably doesn't alter the numbers enough so that you'd go and, present us with, orders of magnitude difference in those costings. Is that true?
We did a quick guess, and if we were to fill it all up, we might be able to realize an additional 15,000 in revenue for a month.
Okay, yeah, not significant when you're talking about 250 a month. So, okay, and then just Councillor Stout type question here. Indulge me a second. Chateau Vitaline is contained to the residents and presents a significant amount of the active cases in Beaumont. If we backed Chateau Vitaline out of our current 93, what does that leave us in a numbers per 100,000? And I'm not trying to minimize anything. I'm simply asking kind of a math question here and to see what that looks like and where that puts us in the region, because I think we'd still be high is my point. So.
Yes, thank you very much, Councillor Van Newkirk. You're absolutely correct. I sent a note yesterday to AHS to confirm the active cases at the Chateau. The last data I had, the number was in the low 20s, but that was a few days ago. So I'm still trying to confirm that. But you're right, you take that out of our 93 current cases and it's still considerably high. How that calculates into case by 100, I could figure that out, but it would take me a few minutes, as could you. But yeah. I know where you're going. People may think that, yeah, it's contained in one area. No, that's not the case.
Yeah, and the part that is hardest to struggle with right now is that we've lost control or track of the contact tracing. In the municipality, we really don't know who's transmitting what and where. When we pause for a second and think of the Black Gold Schools data, we haven't seen, oodles and oodles of cases within our schools, but every time there's a case in a school, that's a teacher and a class isolating. And what we're being told is the family is who brought it there, and the family gatherings are what are the catalysts for a bunch of the school transmission. Our teachers and students are playing COVID roulette right now every day. And that's just a life reality right now. So, those are the points that I wanted to make. When we look at the reduction in close contact and the fact that Beaumont has the highest numbers, and even if we backed out Chateau Vitaline, we're still probably right up there. And these are concerns. When you look at it from a revenue aspect, we're about to wear out our calculators here in the next 2.5 days. And, Mr. DeBlanco has weighed in on, some of the crystal ball exercise of, what would we do if we were to maintain some of those costs. So I think I've asked everything I'd like to and kind of said what I'd like to for right now. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor Barnard.
Thank you, Mayor. And tough, because there's a lot of information here that nobody knows, and we're working on a lot of information that some people have, and trying to get it all in my head is a little daunting. Questions remaining right now. Mr. Schwartz, the recommendation number 1, is that the one you are recommending, these are more like options, but is recommendation number one your recommendation based on everything you know?
Administration talked about this at length over the last 24 hours, and that is our preferred recommendation. And the pros and cons are listed. We're really getting the impression, and council has, this is ultimately your decision. So, you know, this is almost, it's easy for me to say, but we wanted to try and balance the whole notion of reducing personal contact with providing opportunities for our citizens to recreate and to get out. And that's a message that's been consistent with council as far as providing service. But this is a tough one. From an administrative perspective, is it cleaner just to close the door? Absolutely it is. But we're trying to balance being safe with that whole civic, you know, with allowing people to keep their lives in some sort of order.
I appreciate that. And it sounds very much like the province is trying to do the same. They may be balancing different things, but therein lies the confusion because people are not getting a strong message either way. But I think we're all in that boat. The other question I wanted to ask, has your team thought of increasing outdoor recreation activities with the full staff complement that you would be not using in the other facilities? Because I am really thinking that our young population and our junior high and high school students, they're going to go crazy if the whole winter they're inside. So I'm just really wondering whether that's part of your recommendation for number one, to look at some additional outdoor activities.
Yes, thank you very much. Great question, Councillor Barnhart. We are looking at increasing our outdoor programming, and that was one of the recommendations from Dr. Hinshaw yesterday as well, including No Infrastructure is taking council's suggestion last week and adding an additional outdoor skating facility, and we'll get our outdoor rinks up and running here too. But we'll also get our events people looking at what other things we can do to get people out on our beautiful, we have an amazing trail system in our city. So we'll look at ways we can promote getting people out to do things like that.
And if this is all possible, I really would like to see some cross-country ski trails somewhere. And I know we have the capacity, and I think it's down by Lions or in the Four Seasons Park there. But I mean, that's relative, it's expensive for some folks, I know, but it's relatively inexpensive and it's local and all that kind of good stuff. So anyway, I'll stop there, but it's a tough one. This is a tough one.
That's a good suggestion, and we'll take that back. Councillor Hendricks, I wanted to, I quickly asked for the demographics on that population, because you're absolutely correct. And at the latest census we did, over 23% of our population is in that demographic of 20 to 39 years old. That is huge.
Right.
Thank you.
And if I can just add to that, and back to my earlier point about money, I just wanted to get it out that cash flow is not an issue within the community. So yes, we're having a revenue expense issue that's been brought forward. My point about the debenture was simply that we will be starting to pay a debenture. I'm not suggesting to get another one, but our debentures are starting to get payments on the facility. Wasn't sure what the timing is of that payment. But yes, our population base is significant in that category. And let's keep in mind that with Edmonton being the neighbor, and if they're not going to close their rec centers, you know, we're going to create a mobile situation with our groups. People are going to go north, and they're going to find their way to events and things that they still want. So if we want to reduce the spread, we got to also reduce the mobility, and we still got to maintain some sort of activity here in Beaumont. So recommendation.
If I can comment on that, thank you very much. It's something I should have had a little bit heavier on. We also believe it's important to side with our regional partners here. We're just going to have this cross-border shopping and hopping and stuff going on. So I'm on a call tomorrow morning with my colleagues, and we'll debate again more about some of the closures that we're seeing in the regions and see if we can influence those to be
right
together.
Yep, for sure.
Okay, so I see no further request to speak, and the CAO actually summed up my arguments for what I'm about to do when he was answering Councillor Barnhart's questions. it's all about balance. So at this point, I'm prepared to move that we go with recommendation number 1. Based on the short term. If this goes longer, we're going to have a look at the books, because I'm not sure how long we can sustain a 200, what did I say, $41,000 deficit month over month. So, but in the short term, I think we try to strike that balance and continue to provide some activities for our residents and some semblance of normalcy, and hopefully that won't kill the mental health or help the mental health in the community. So at this point, I will move recommendation 1 and open for discussion. Councillor Danlock.
Thank you, Your Worship. Should option 1 pass, I want to ask that we emphasize Councillor Hendrick's comments about the proportionality of our younger population and the intent of AHS to minimize personal contact. I think the balanced approach, I'm comfortable with it after our discussion today. The communication piece will be critical, as it always is. And I really want us to make sure we emphasize that we're trying to achieve a balance here and show leadership in a balanced way, as opposed to a all or nothing approach in this particular circumstance. So I know communication is always important, but our disproportionate high in terms of younger population is a big part of this whole thing. So let's emphasize that in our communication piece. Should the motion pass? Thank you.
Appreciate that. Just a quick reminder that we got communications coming up about this next. Councillor Stout, followed by Councillor Barnhart, followed by Councillor Hendricks.
Thanks, Your Worship. Yes, I'm going to assume then that if the province does either change the rules again in 3 weeks' time or whenever, or if there is greater clarity from the province regarding sports and recreation centres, then we move. This may all become moot, I guess, is what I'm suggesting.
You are correct. If the situation changes, we'll be having another meeting.
Yes, and we react accordingly. If the province says, well, no, sports centres can't stay open, then we react accordingly. All right. I just wanted to alert everybody to the possibility that I think it's very likely we'll be having this discussion again in 3 weeks or so. Thank you.
The way it's going, I dare say we'll be having a meeting in 3 weeks, possibly 2 weeks, depending on what's going on with the curve.
Maybe sooner.
Yeah, Councillor Barnhart.
That was exactly going to be my point. We operated during the emergency operations period with weekly updates. And I think between now and definitely the end of the year, I'd like to hear from Mr. Swartz at least once a week on how things are going. We're in a pretty tight situation here. And I really do. I appreciate the emails, but I also think that having these discussions is very, very helpful.
We can certainly do that if that's the will of council. That instead of doing the emails, we can do public. That'll disseminate the information wider in our community. I'm certainly up for that.
Yeah, it's a great idea. Let's table that for a second, and then we'll make another motion to reinstitute those meetings. Councillor Hendricks.
Your Worship, just yes to recommendation number 1 and yes to your motion. Also, I'm assuming when we say admin staff have gone through this recommendation, that FCSS, their group has had some impact at the table. We have certainly a COVID situation, but we also have a mental health situation. And somehow we have to pay as much attention to the mental health as we are with COVID. Those two definitely are running in parallel channels. Plus, as we move further into this, we started in March, we're now in November. Of course, yesterday's conversations from Parliament Hill are such that the vaccine may not be with us for some time as a result of agreements that have been made and our inability to do production here. So if we're looking at, as Parliament Hill says, June, July for potential starts, the mental health piece is going to get more and more significant. So whatever we're doing, we got to be really careful that we're not having an adverse effect on the mental health piece as we move forward. So look forward to the guidance we get out of FCSS and certainly the rest of admin, but the whole piece as a whole, not just one strategic, zero's the number for COVID. Yeah, but it's costing us people in terms of their businesses, livelihoods, mental health issues. We've seen suicide rates and everything else going up. There's another impact, and the two have to work together. So thank you.
Yeah, great point.
Thank you very much, Councillor Hendricks. All right, seeing no further requests to speak, I will call the question. All those in favor of implementing recommendation number 1? All right, so that carries unanimously. Councillor Barnhart, do you wish to make a motion to reinstitute the weekly briefing till the end of 2021, and we can renew it if this thing goes past, or it's the end of 2020, and we can renew it if this thing continues to drag into January, February, March?
Yes, I would definitely like to make that motion. Thank you very much for wording it for me. So, weekly briefing meetings with council. Yes.
Okay, discussion on the motion.
Nope.
Okay, all those in favor, please vote again. Hope we didn't clear the votes from last time. Okay. Okay, so I need some quick thumbs up. Is everybody's vote the current vote, or you?
Current vote.
Okay,
Current vote.
good. So that passes unanimously, which brings us to the communications piece. CAO, Mikey.
Yeah, I'm going to hand it over to Mike B in a second. I just want to clarify on that last motion. What we'll do is send out a doodle poll with some suggestions on a timeline, and we'll, and then we'll nail down a weekly meeting. Thank you.
You.
Mr. Berezowski, please.
Good afternoon, Council. So I think the underlying theme of this meeting has been the complexity and difficulty of the situation, and that also applies, unfortunately, to communications. There are quite a few challenges in this one. There's a perceived inconsistency in the rules that citizens have been pointing out, maybe rightly so in some cases from the provincial government. The different approach among the regions, because residents have been quick to point out that one region is not necessarily doing the same thing as another community, as well as just the changing information that and the lack of clarity that we've had. Typically in the past, when the provincial government has announced new measures, they do a briefing with municipalities and school boards and other local authorities ahead of time. That did not happen this week. And that put us at a challenge too, in terms of preparing public messaging and communications and providing details to the public about how this impacts city operations and residents. So all of this is to say that there's no simple silver bullet for communications to this. However, we will be taking a primarily digital media approach because of the nature of the changing information. So it will be primarily with web content and on social media. We'll use social media to drive people to the website with message focusing on, of course, the minimizing of personal contact as much as possible. That the success of this approach does depend very much on people following the measures and the procedures and protocols that have been put in place in BSRC. And and the website will just have to be where the more detailed information about what programs and services are available when and how. So if you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer those.
Thank you very much, Mike. Really do appreciate that. I do know that you and your team are very talented when it comes to communications. And so I have every confidence that you'll be able to steer us through this as we go. Councillor Barnhart, question for communications.
Thank you very much. And thank you, Mr. Berezowski. My question is there a phone number with a real live person at the end of the phone that we could post that people could call if they have questions? And I realize that social media is the way most people are, well, I don't know most people, but definitely majority of people are familiar with using social media. But I just know that there's going to be people who are either questioning want to put in a complaint, want to ask for clarification, just want to reach out to somebody. Maybe it's FCSS, I don't know, but is there some way we could have a phone number that is staffed? And I know that we have staff that are being redeployed. Is it possible to redeploy someone or some people to staff that, even if it's between 9 and or 8 and 4 or something like that, or a certain time of day? I just think offering that for mental health reasons, for age-related, not using social media, lots of reasons. I just wonder if you've thought about that.
Yes, through your worship to Councillor Barnhart, that's an excellent point. In terms of details, I'll leave that to Mr. Suter to supplement if he has anything to add, but we would have guest services, of course, available to answer any questions about BSRC. And we have been promoting the FCSS quite a bit in social media and also in print about their services too. And I don't know if Ms. Williston's is available, but I do know that she has commented that they have actually seen an increase in volume of calls and clientele. So the points that Councillor Hendricks also raised, very, very important too. And that is part of the thinking, I think, behind maintaining some services at the BSRC too, is that this does give some people an outlet and hopefully alleviate some of the mental health situation, because physical activity, as we know, is quite helpful there.
And could I just clarify, if it's advertised as if you have questions about, maybe that might help, because it's not just about recreation. It's not, it's about COVID in all its many colors, right? So, maybe it's how we message that. People don't generally want to call FCSS if they think they're going to be stigmatized as, oh, I don't have a mental health problem. So they're not going to call if I have a mental health problem. I'm not going to admit I have a mental health problem. So if I have a question about what can I do, where can I go, maybe it's a general question about COVID related stuff.
Certainly, I'll take that under advisement.
Councillor Van Nieuwkerk.
Yeah, thank you. Good discussion on communication so far. Where, if you were to point residents to the main place to give feedback at regarding this decision, what would that be? I know there's a few places, but where should we try and direct communication? Should we be given a choice?
Sorry, can you, through your worship to Councillor Van Nieuwkerk, sorry, that is for residents to contact the city with feedback?
Yeah, feedback on this decision and keeping the facility open. If people have questions on the facility, they phone the facility. But if people have concerns with this decision or any other the COVID related decisions, where do we direct the communication to? Where's the best place for residents?
Well, the best place for residents would be the administration phone number when people do have feedback, or to City Council's contact information, which is on our website as well. If people have comments about council decisions, they can provide those to council as well.
Thank you.
Councillor Hendricks.
Your worship, again, given the startling statistics for Beaumont, and you see how it places us not only in the region but in Alberta, and as Mr. Schwartz pointed out, in Canada, are we due for an information campaign? At the time when Mr. Horgan offered up that he didn't want to intertravel between provinces, they literally set up at the border an information campaign where you were stopped, you're given a leaflet, this is what we're looking for. Please ensure that you follow certain guidelines while you're visiting BC. Do we have something that perhaps says, okay, we put our peace officers out like a check stop as they come into Beaumont at 50th, a little pamphlet, just to really reinforce the point that this is not just on websites. This is real. Beaumont's got a problem. You got to help us. And I think when you see, especially a vehicle with some lights flashing, you got to stop and you're handed a little pamphlet. People take notice. So I don't know. I leave it to the communications people, but I know how effective it appeared to me at the Alberta border.
Through your worship to Councillor Hendricks, that's an excellent point. my team and I did have a discussion about communications campaign, and in terms of messaging, you may have noticed a shift in the past week, certainly with Mayor Stewart's messaging too about collective responsibility, and that following health measures is an extension of the care that people in this community tend to show one another. So we will be looking at that, because I think by this point, people are well aware of the statistics. They're well aware of what the measures are. Maybe they still think, some of them still think it doesn't apply to them. So there is that emotional connection. But beyond that too, there's as much as communications can do, and I always want to try to do more and see if we can do more, and look at ways we can do better. I think ultimately some of this may rest with enforcement, as you noted. And if people do see a presence, I do know that the Director of Protective Services has been looking at that, and the provincial government has also mentioned that peace officers may be given some opportunity for enforcement, but then again, that was said during the spring, and that never materialized where they received the mechanism to do that. But I do agree, a more visible presence may be a lot more efficient or effective. So we'll take that under advisement, and if Mr. Cook has anything to add, I think he's available.
Good morning, Council, through your worship to all the Council, and thank you, Director Berezowski. Just agree with your comments, Mike, with regards to enforcement. However, I want to share with Council this morning that our Enforcement Services Department was engaged with an update with exactly that. The mechanism is not in place yet to enforce. However, our staff have been given the direction, CC'd with our RCMP detachment, of course, to educate. We can educate on the provincial health order that's currently in place. We can educate on the measures the City of Beaumont is taking to help protect our residents. So it is a resource, our staff, and our team in enforcement is a resource that we can utilize. I have a meeting later on this afternoon, as time permits, if not tomorrow morning, with the team lead to actually look at some other options and how we can actually get out and engage our residents. I will be sharing that with administration, which I'm sure will be shared back with Council. Thank you.
Great.
Councilor Bronner, were you looking for round two?
Just a very quick comment, Mr. Berezowski, the positive messaging around what you can do during this time might be a really helpful thing. Again, on social media probably will work just as well. You can go for a walk, you can use our trails, you can meet, somebody at a coffee shop as long as you're 25% vacancy. That might help people to look at it from the positive side rather than what they can't do.
Absolutely. That's exactly where we're thinking too. Thank you very much, Councillor. Thank you.
Appreciate that. Okay, so I think that brings us to the end. Thank you very much for the update and the actions going forward. Thank you for Council for having this debate. Considering that budget was supposed to start 5 minutes ago, I'm going to propose we delay for half an hour so people can grab a bite to eat, and then we will reconvene to start budget at 12:35. Seeing anything else, I'll call this meeting adjourned, and see you all again in half